KGO-TV presents The Great Ideas, a program devoted to understanding the ideas by which we live. You are cordially invited to take part in this exciting adventure in uncovering the meaning of the ideas we all use every day of our lives. Each week at this time, Dr. Mortimer J. Adler, speaking informally to you across his desk, will undertake to explain one of the great ideas. He will try to answer the questions raised in your mind by that idea or by his explanation of it. He invites you to send your questions in. A set of the first-year selections from the great books donated by the Great Books Council of San Francisco will be given to each person whose question is discussed on this program. KGO-TV brings philosophy to you in the person of Dr. Adler, one of America's foremost philosophers, director of the Institute for Philosophical Research in San Francisco, and editor-in-chief of the two-volume Syntopicon, or Encyclopedia of the Great Ideas. Today, Dr. Adler is back with us again and begins the discussion of government. Dr. Adler.
Good afternoon. I'm glad to be back with you again to discuss another great idea. But before I do so, before we begin the discussion of government, I would like to thank you all again for the letters you've written and for the questions you have sent in. My friend, Dr. Hutchins, who discussed education and the good life last Sunday in my absence, also told me how grateful he was for the many excellent questions you provided him as a basis for the conversation he had with you. When I got back from New York during the week, I found a considerable number of questions about happiness accumulated from previous week's discussions. Unfortunately, we can't answer most of those, but there's one that I would like to answer. This one here from Mrs. Carol W. Purdy, Berkeley, California, who asked about a book that I referred to when I talked about tragedy in relation to happiness. That book, Mrs. Purdy, is by Miguel Unamuno, the great Spanish philosopher, Unamuno, and the title is The Tragic Sense of Life. Just a word more about the questions on this program. In the past, we've attempted to answer the questions at the end of the discussion, and sometimes, as the very last time on happiness, I start right off by considering some of the questions, but today we're going to deal with them differently. They're the kind of questions that I think will fit right into the discussion, and so I'm going to ask my associate, Mr. Luckman, to come right on with the questions. Mr. Luckman?
Welcome.
Oh,
Lloyd.
thank you.
Nice to see you.
Sit down.
Thank you.
I think what we'll do today, Lloyd, is to see if we can put the questions right into the discussion as we go along.
Well, I'll follow you closely.
Fine. Now, our problem today in this opening consideration of government is the problem of whether government is necessary. Is government necessary? Now, is that a silly question? Is it a question as silly as, is sex necessary? Do you remember Will Rogers' remark about that? He said, no, not necessary, just 99 2/3% of life. Well, is the question, is sex necessary like that? You may think so. You may say, is the question, is government necessary like that? You may think, for example, that No one in the world would say it isn't necessary. Who says that government isn't necessary? And if you start to think about it, and I were to say, well, anarchists say that government is not necessary, you may reply, well, who bothers with anarchists? They're un-American. And as a matter of fact, if you start to think about anarchists, you may have the image before you of a man with long whiskers and a smoking bomb in his hand, muttering gutturally in Russian accents. But that isn't quite the whole truth. There are, of course, bomb-throwing anarchists, but there are also philosophical anarchists, and our own Thomas Jefferson was one of them. I'm sure you've all heard a statement of his that's been quoted again and again and again, which is that government is best which governs least. And he goes further than that, as a matter of fact, comparing the Indians, the American Indians, whose society he thought existed without any law or government, and the highly civilized Europeans who lived under, in his view, too much law and government. He thought it was much better to live as the Indians did, without any government at all, than as the highly civilized Europeans did. By the way, Mr. Luckman, don't we have a question right on that point?
Very much so, Dr. Adler. It's from Marjorie Glover.
Let's have it.
She lives here in San Francisco. She says, following the theory that the best government is the least government, would you say that the best government of all might be no government at all? That is, if humans ever improve to the point where they govern themselves perfectly as individuals, might it not be possible to dispense with organized group government, except for possibly a few routine technicalities? And if so, how long do you think it will take us to reach this happy state of anarchy?
Well, that's an interesting question.
Right on the
because Mrs. Glover, in some sense, is saying what Thoreau said when he thought about Jefferson's remark that government governs best which governs least. You remember Thoreau, Henry David Thoreau, another American anarchist, not a bomb-throwing one, just a philosophical anarchist. Thoreau, here the chapter on government in the Syntopicon. Let me read you what Thoreau said. I heartily accept, he says, the motto, that government is best which governs least. And I should like to see it acted up to more rapidly and systematically. I'd like to see it more systematically carried out. And when more systematically carried out, it finally amounts to this, which also I believe, that government is best which governs not at all.
Just as Miss Glover said.
Just as Miss Glover said. Now, the other part of Miss Glover's question is, will men ever get so much more perfect that they can dispense with government? To that part of Miss Glover's question, Alexander Hamilton has an answer. As a matter of fact, we have the answer of Alexander Hamilton on one of these plaques on the wall here. Let's look at this. Hamilton, in the Federalist Papers, raising the question, what is government itself but the greatest of all reflections on human nature? Answers by saying, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. And he goes on to say, something that we shall refer to again next week and the week after, if angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. Now, let's consider Hamilton's answer for a moment. Let's consider Hamilton's answer for a moment. Is he saying, or is the answer that he wants us to think about to be stated as follows, that government is necessary because men are imperfect, simply because they're not as perfect as angels are or would be? I don't think that that is the whole answer to the question, because I think we have to state the question a little more fully and then find a more complete answer than simply the imperfection of men taking men by themselves. Suppose we ask the question this way. Necessary for what? What is government necessary for? And the answer that I would give, at least, subject to debate, to that question, is that government is necessary for the existence of society and for its peace, for what we call civil peace. Well, having said that, you may then ask another question. You may say, why is it necessary? Why is government necessary for the existence of society and for its civil peace? And I think I can give you at least two reasons, two very good reasons, why government is necessary if society is to endure and to exist peacefully. The first is that in order for men to live together and act together, they need some way of reaching agreement about the rules and decisions which will guide them in their common enterprise. And secondly, since even when men agree to the rules and decisions, not all voluntarily comply with them or obey them. There is some need for the use of force to compel compliance or obedience. Let me see if I can explain these 2 points with a diagram that I've put on the blackboard. I hope as you look at the blackboard, you find my writing legible. As a matter of fact, Lloyd, if I had working for me one of those angels the bishop has working for him, I think I'd know how to use the angel. I'd have him put my diagrams on the blackboard for me so that the diagrams were all bright and shining bright, I should say. Let's look at this diagram now and see if we can understand in the diagram the reason why government is necessary. Above the double line, I've considered the case in which government is not necessary. Here is the individual man, Jones himself. And we're concerned with Jones as trying to reach his own goal in life. I don't care what that goal is. He reaches that goal by acting according to his own rules and decisions. He may take advice from other men. He may seek the direction of other men. But whether or not he takes advice or seeks direction, he acts toward or for his own goal according to his own rules and decisions. No government is necessary in that case. Now let's take the other case for a moment. Let's take the case of Jones, not by himself, but in a group. Jones, along with Smith and Brown. In fact, in order to make this case a little more striking, let's take this little group of Jones, Smith, and Brown and consider them as an exploring team. These three men have associated themselves with one another. They formed a group to look for the headwaters of the Amazon. Now, before they go off on this perilous, long expedition through the Brazilian jungle, what must they do in order to ensure that the three of them together as a group are going to achieve their common goal, which in this particular case is finding the headwaters of the Amazon? They've got to find some way, don't they, of acting together, all three of them as a group, for that common goal. But according to whose rules and decisions? Jones wants to go that way. Smith wants to go that way. Brown wants to go that way. If you let each man rule, the group falls apart at once. Hence the question is, how do they stick together? How do they remain a peaceful, effective social group trying to act in concord or together to reach a common goal? According to whose rules and decisions? The answer to that question, I think, can be found in only one of two ways. There are only two ways these three men can possibly preserve their group as a group, acting together for a common goal. Either as they start out in the jungle, they must decide that Jones is going to be the leader, and the other two will have to agree to abide by his decisions and rules of operation as they go on their perilous expedition. That's what we've come to learn in the modern world is the Führer principle, the leader principle, the principle of the chief or leader. And many societies, most primitive societies, and many modern societies still have that single ruler as the way to keep that kind of government to keep the group together. But there's another principle. They could decide to take a majority vote. They could decide unanimously, all agreeing before they start, to take a majority vote on every question and let the majority decide. That will work just as well. That will work just as well. For they will always be able to reach a decision by a vote of 2 against 1 And since they've agreed to abide by that decision, they can act together under it to reach their common goal. According to whose rules and decisions, then? According to the rules and decisions made by the form of government they have decided on. The government of one man or the government of majority rule. It makes no difference. But here you see that government, something which is a principle of decision and of action, other than the opinion or decision of one man, is necessary, quite necessary, to keep the group together and make them function together in concord and in harmony and in efficiency for the achievement, whatever their common purpose is. I think this tells us, in essence, why government is necessary. What I've just said, St. Thomas Aquinas, I think, says better than I, in a famous passage in which, in a single sentence I'm going to read you, he sums up this point. For he says, a social life cannot exist among a number of men unless government is set up to look after the common good. Notice, the common good, the common goal. It is because a number are together in trying to reach a common goal that you have to have government or a principle of decision and a way of enforcing it. And Charles Darwin, many centuries after Aquinas, also said, man being what he is, any form of government is better than none. Now, this solution that I've just stated applies to every form of society, from this simple group of three to the whole state, to the society in which we live, the largest in which we live, to any business corporation, to any club, to any association of men, even, of course, to the human family. But when you come to the human family, you really have a difficulty. I wonder if you ever thought about this. Leaving the children out, as I would leave the children out, because while they're children, they should have no voice in their own government. You have the husband and wife. But when you have only two members of a society, it's as if you didn't have Brown here. Just had Jones and Smith. Let that be husband and wife for a moment. Then what principle can you use? Can you have majority rule? Not when you have two. In the family consisting of husband and wife, the only principle of government can be the rule of one. And of course, you know the answer I think is the right one. I tend to agree, I'm afraid that some of you will not like my answer, but I tend to agree with St. Paul's injunction to wives that they should obey their husbands. This is one way of keeping peace in the family.
Dr. Edler.
Yes, Mr. Locke.
Now, before you get tangled up in domestic relations or with your own wife on this particular problem, I have a question here from one of our...
Why don't you pull your chair up so we can sit down together on that one?
Do that. You haven't answered this question, which comes to us from Dominic Cortese, who lives on McKee Road in San Jose, California. Now, in his letter, he refers to the political philosophies of Hobbes, Rousseau, and Locke, and their view that society is not natural. He points out that, as the Declaration of Independence says, government may be necessary to secure the rights of men in society. But he goes on, if society itself is not natural, then it may not be necessary for men to live in society. And if that's the case, that men don't have to live in society, then maybe government isn't necessary either.
The argument Mr. Cortese states, I think, advances the analysis we want to follow. Mr. Cortese's right. If society is not necessary, then government is not necessary, since all we've been able to say about government is that it is necessary to preserve society and have men live together socially, effectively, and peacefully. But Mr. Cortese, I think, is wrong, Mr. Luckman, in saying, even of the writers that he quotes, Locke and Rousseau and Hobbes, I think he's wrong in saying that they held that society is not necessary. Even they, who thought that men were not by nature instinctively social, as the bees are, or the ants, or the social wasps and other insects, nevertheless, even they thought that society was necessary for human life and good for life, and that government was necessary to keep the peace in society. So I think Mr. Cortese goes further. Well, as a matter of fact, Lloyd, even the anarchists, I think, hold that society is necessary even when they think that government is not necessary for society. I have here in the Syntopicon a quotation from a Russian anarchist this time, but believe me, not a bomb-throwing anarchist, but a great philosophical anarchist, the great Prince Kropotkin, who says, let me quote this to you, "The anarchists conceive a society in which all the mutual relations of its members are regulated not by law, not by authorities, whether self-imposed or elected, but by mutual agreements between the members." There you see is an anarchist who is saying society is good and men can live together socially, but without law, without government, without the imposition of any external force, but only by mutual agreement of the members. Doesn't that answer the question, Lloyd? Doesn't that answer it at all?
Not to my satisfaction. And the reason I'm differing with you is that, while government may be necessary, as you're pointing out, may it not be a necessary evil. I'm thinking of, you quoted an anarchist, and I have another that he brought to my mind. Kropotkin brings to mind Bakunin.
He's another philosophical anarchist.
Yes, a philosophical anarchist. And let me quote him at you and see what you say. He points out that the ruling classes have long made us feel that government is a necessary evil. And he goes on to say that it may be a necessary evil for them, all right, but not for the people they're governing. For them, it's not only, it's not a necessary, but a tragic evil, a fatal evil.
Well, that is a position we do have to face, because, as I see it, if we agree that government is necessary, we have to face the question whether, as necessary, it is good or evil.
Yes.
Let me see if I can answer that question by stating three views of the matter. Two of them, I think, are extreme. And I'm going to try to take, both today and then carry it on much more next week, the moderate view. One extreme view is, as Mr. Luckman just represented it, the view that government is a necessary evil, and therefore we should have as little of it as possible. This view is based upon the notion that the end of government is merely the protection of one man from another, and that government, while doing this good to us, is evil because it fundamentally destroys our liberty. The liberty the individual man has when he acts according to his own rules and decisions. This we must give up when we live in society and government, and the evil of government is it destroys our liberty, though it does the little good of protecting us. At the opposite extreme is the view that government is an unlimited good, and we should have as much government as possible, because this view of government is not, first of all, it holds that government destroys no liberty whatsoever, and second, it looks upon government as being the means for helping men to achieve their happiness and their salvation even. It is as if government were the direction of man to the whole end of his life. I think that goes too far to the opposite extreme. I think government is not as good as that, nor do I think government is as evil as the anarchists or Thomas Jefferson thinks it is. My middle position is the view, or is based upon the view, that government is a limited good. Neither a necessary evil nor an unlimited good, but a limited good which has as its objective not the whole welfare of man, not the ultimate happiness of mankind, or certainly not his eternal salvation, but that it has as its only objective the peace of a civil society, a peace achieved by justice and good order, and that with this definite limited objective of social or civil peace through justice, government performs its function for human welfare, and in this respect, and only in this respect, is good as a means. Let me summarize this quickly by saying that, in the first place, we see the necessity of government for the very existence of society. Even this social group, they put Brown back in there again, even this social group, this small social group of a team of explorers going into the jungle, can't stick together and achieve their goal without some principle of government, whether it be majority rule or the rule of a leader they themselves have chosen. And that government that they have set up for themselves, that principle of government they have set up for themselves, is necessary and good. It's good as a means for achieving this goal. In this particular case, the goal is discovering the headwaters of the Amazon. So when men associate for any purpose, I care not what the purpose is. It may be the purpose of making money as in a corporation for profit. It may be the purpose of advancing learning as in a university. It may be the purpose of some social activity together as in a social club. Or it may be the purpose of a good human life itself as is the purpose when they associate in a state. Whatever the purpose, government is necessary to achieve that purpose of association so that men can act together and act not only together but in peace. Now, if as a result of today's discussion we understand the necessity of government and that it is not as necessary just an evil, but it is as necessary a limited good, then the problem we want to go on to next time, and I think a very interesting problem indeed, is the problem of how government serves this purpose. How, being necessary, does it help men? How does it actually work to help men live together peacefully in such a way that they can achieve whatever is the common purpose of their association, of their coming together for a common life and acting together or trying to act together in concord. Now, as I go on, Lloyd, with this discussion next week, I hope that again, as in the past, we can get our friends who have been so kind to us in this program to send their questions in about government. Next week, questions about the nature of government and how it works as a means toward the end of government. But if there are any questions that any of you have on today's discussion about the necessity of government and whether government is a necessary evil or an unlimited good or just a limited good, I hope you will send those questions in too, because as we go on during the 4 weeks of December to discuss the whole and difficult and great idea of government, we will try, as each week comes up, to answer the questions which are most appropriate that week. Thank you very much.